Hi and good evening, everyone. We welcome you to this seventh episode of Showcase Studios in Conversation series. It's wonderful to see how this journey has grown and how we moved along, starting with the first episode with Nathulalji and the Nagaras, and then Sonam Kalra and Sufi Gospel, Sunita Bhuya and the story of the violin, Dhanashri Pandit Rai and the story of the Tumari, Rasika Shekhar and flute, and Sufi Kawals and Niazi Nizami brothers. And here today we have another absolutely amazing story for you, which is the story of the piano. How many of us are really aware of the Indian classical ragas being played on the piano, and how many of us have really heard them? It's a little hard to connect, but here we have this young raga pianist, as he's called, absolutely amazing. He started his career with this. He chose this as his line and his calling. He's been doing a lot of collaborations across the globe with many different artists and different genres and sounds of music. However, he has stayed pure and true to the classical rags on the piano. Today, he'll be showcasing a lot of very interesting pieces and he'll have a lot of very interesting things to tell us. I'm not going to hog the screen for long, and I'm going to, of course, bring them on the screen. So, may I welcome on the screen Utsav Lal. Hi, Utsav. Good evening and welcome to Showcase Studio.
Hey, thanks for having me over here today.
And thank you for joining us. And the host for this evening is none other than the eminent music journalist, encyclopedia of music, as I always, every single time call him, Narendra Kusnur. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to exit the screen because I'm waiting to hear this musical conversation. And I'm going to pop in towards the end, of course. So, Utsav and Naren, over to you all. So, Utsav, we're looking forward to a beautiful starting piece.
Yeah, thanks for having me over here. Yeah. Okay, so I guess I'm just going to start playing and then we can talk. Oh, I think I can't hear you, unfortunately, Narendra ji.
Can you
Oh,
hear me now?
yeah, that's
Okay,
perfect now.
sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I we popped up this question to a couple of people, and two of them have got the song right. It's Pucho Na Kaise. So we've got the right answers from Usha Rajaram and Anju Uppal. Uh, yes. So now this is a popular Hindi film song. Was that how you started learning Indian music on the piano, or by playing old film songs? Would you tell us about your journey, about how you got into this thing about playing Indian music?
Yeah, I started off with old Bollywood film songs, and that was when I was pretty young. I studied with a pianist called Brian Silas, who I'm sure a lot of
Yeah,
people know
yeah,
of,
yeah.
which was incredible because I learned how to play by ear and I got introduced to these songs at that age um, when I was like 8 or 9 years old. I liked some songs at that point, and some of them didn't really make sense to me, but it's kind of coming to a point where I'm really going back to a lot of these songs and like understanding all the. It's kind of incredible what they ended up doing in those days because they would write songs based on ragas. Like
Hmm.
this one is based on Ahir Bhairav,
Right, better.
um, and keep like the integrity of the rag in there, but also like orchestrate for like string sections and horn sections and have like Latin percussion going on at the same time and this huge like mix. It's kind of the greatest example of musical fusion I think
Okay,
that I've heard. Um, uh, a lot of those old Bollywood era songs. So I started off with that, and that kind of led me on to Indian classical music. I ended up
okay,
liking the more Indian classical inspired ones, and then got curious about what Indian classical music actually was, and figured out that there was improvisation in it, which I liked because I think at that age I wanted to make my own music as well, rather than learn specific things and just play them back. I was excited to like sit and explore on my own, so that kind of took me on to Indian classical music.
okay. Was there any Indian classical music in the family, or did you attend concerts at a young age? Like, what was the early exposure like, or was
Um,
it through radio and stuff, or recordings?
I There was some, but definitely not a lot. I think what happened, like my nani would listen to Indian classical music, and she had trained a little bit as a singer and a slight guitar player, but just at the point where she would be like singing with her friends and
Hmm.
like playing at functions. But um, it was only when I kind of started getting more towards Indian classical music that my parents started listening to it, and now everyone in the family loves going to concerts and buying CDs and listening to all of these like great musicians. But I feel like we all started veering towards the Indian classical thing at the same time, rather than me growing up in an atmosphere of like there being ragas all the time playing in the house.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Now, piano, usually people start with Western classical or jazz or things like that. What was your training like, and how did you go about with it?
so at the same time that I was learning from Brian Sir, I ended up studying with John Raphael at the Delhi School of Music and doing Western classical music because it kind of made sense to learn the piano how it should be played before doing other exploring my own things on it. And then he was actually the person who told me I should check jazz out because he heard the Indian classical music that I was trying in those days to play on the piano, and he said, I think you'll find a lot of similarities with jazz. And I remember the moment where we were sitting in the room and he like played Happy Birthday on the piano, but he played it in like 6 different ways with different chords. And I was like, how do you do that? And he said, I have this book that's teaching me how to harmonize in a jazz way. And my family ended up moving to Ireland when I was 13. So when I got there, I enrolled in classical piano lessons, and also there's a school called the New Park School of Music over there where I ended up taking some private lessons and also joining an ensemble of which was mostly like 55, 60-year-old men who'd been like getting together to play jazz for ages. And I think at that point they were a bit wary of having like a 13-year-old kid coming in joining because maybe they can't make whatever jokes they usually like to make in that situation. But
Yeah.
it was great. Like that was kind of the introduction to jazz and like learning some standards and the basics of like improvisation. And then you could kind of see the links between some aspects of Indian music and jazz, and the Western classical music was like kind of laying the strong technical
Okay.
base to build
Yeah.
on the entire time.
Okay. What are the early Indian classical pieces that you learned, and could you demonstrate a bit, like in terms of something that you learned earlier on?
Yeah, I mean, so early in my early years, I was mostly listening to recordings and occasionally getting a few lessons here and there from different people. And I think the first two instruments that I was very focused towards were Santur and Bansuri.
Okay.
I loved listening to Hariji's recordings. I loved listening to Shivji's recordings, and I would try to get what I could from those pieces. And I think one of the first ones that I actually there's actually a Rahul Sharma ji Bhopali
Okay.
recording which we had a cassette of, which was kind of the first Indian classical track that I really got into. And then the second one was a compilation CD of Hansadhani, and the last
Okay.
track on that was Hariji's Hansadhani. And I think that's the first one that I sat down and figured out on the piano and tried to play along with. So I could just give you a little like,
Sure, sure. Hansadwali you'd play?
yeah, just
Yes.
like 30, 40 seconds of the composition.
Then you can play a little more also. That's fine.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
um, that was Hariji's
Yeah.
composition in Hansudani, which I absolutely, these days I veer more towards the heavier, darker, and moodier rag,
Okay.
but
Hmm.
that was like an amazing intro into Indian classical music.
Okay, couple of things here. Was one is that Indian classical music at has certain features which are very special to Indian classical music. Like, so how was that adaptation happening? And then you played a Hariji tune which was played on the flute. So another adaptation happened in that sense, probably. So if you could just
Yeah, I mean, it's always the thing is there's a lot of different instruments in Indian music. Most of them are striving to be as close to vocal music. If it's
yeah,
instrumental, then they're striving to be closer to Drupad,
yeah,
or there's Khayal. And I feel like I spent a lot of time earlier trying to emulate different instruments, like listening to recordings of flute or santur earlier, and then a lot more sitar and sarod later on. Um, but at the end of the day, it's like each instrument has its own special characteristics. And what it ended up becoming is taking inspiration from the way people do it on other instruments, but also like trying to explore the strengths of the piano and seeing is there a new template that can be formed for presenting this music where the raga aesthetics are preserved as much as they can, but bring in things that are special to the piano, because like jhala on sitar, flute, sarod is all different.
yeah.
Like they kind of molded the way that they're presenting the rag to adapt to the strengths of those instruments.
Okay,
For me these days, voice is absolutely key. And because
okay,
I learned from Ustad Basifuddin Dagarji,
yeah,
who's
yeah.
Drupad
So
singer,
Drupal, yeah, that,
like Drupad has been absolutely like key in like crucial for me diving into this music as much as I have. It's I heard Zia Fariduddin ji sing a concert, I think in 2007 in Delhi,
okay.
and that was kind of the first time that I'd heard Drupal, and went back and tried to find out what it was and what are the rules, because it's like everything's so much slower in this than other forms of Indian music. Like it,
Could you
people,
tell us a bit about Dhrupat? Elaborate a bit for the listeners, like in terms of, especially in terms of instrumental music and how you adapted it from what you learned from a vocalist, and just a little bit to
yeah.
explain to the viewers.
I mean, so Drupad is kind of probably one of the most serious forms of Indian classical music, still being practiced today. A lot of the instrumental styles came out of Drupad. Khayal also came out of Drupad, which is these days the predominant vocal style. And I learned Dagarvani Drupad, which has a huge emphasis on alap, which is kind of the slow,
Yeah,
unmetered portion of the performance. Like in the Dagar tradition, usually the alap is, if you're going to present a rag, the main alap is 70-80% of that. And the composition comes later
yeah, yeah.
with like the percussion instrument. But there's like a lot more focus on small details, and like a lot more patience in like developing things. It's less of like you start off like all guns blazing, like playing loads of different things. You start off very peacefully and like slowly introduce things, and then with with most music, like you always have to think about like you're you're playing things in order to reward the listener with something. And in a lot of forms of music, you get your reward every 10-12 seconds with a lyric or a nice melody or like a nice rhythmic thing that comes in. But with Drupad, often the reward comes way later because it's so patiently building the entire time. It's like the like 10 minutes would be taken just to reach like high sa, or sometimes just to reach ga. And when you get to those destination points, if you've had the patience to like sit and like listen, then it's for me a lot more fulfilling and very sweet to do that.
Okay. Could you tell us now that I mean, you learned from Wasifuddinji, and so two aspects. One is the training that you received from him. How did it help you evolve on a for the piano part of it? Like, I mean, like, how did you adapt what he trained you? And secondly, your riyaz. Like, a lot of it would have been spending in your room on your piano alone and like sort of imagining things or trying to work on new things. So, in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, so I should also say, like Vasavardhanji, I've been studying with for 10 years, but I also, there's so many other people who I've learned from, like Sharat Srivastavji, an incredible violinist.
Violinist, yeah.
Yeah, so he actually, we met in Berlin years and years, like maybe like 3 or 4 years before I met Vasavardhanji, and I've been studying with him throughout these years as well. And recently I've been spending taking some lessons in just intonation and tuning, as well as like basics of chayal singing from Warren Sanders, an incredible musician who lives in Boston and used to teach at my college. But lessons with Vasavardhanji were very simple. I show up with a keyboard. At his house, there's this big row of tanpuras on the side, and you go in and he's always like sitting over there. You set everything up, and then he'll like look at you and then start singing. And then he'll sing one phrase, you play it back. If he likes how you played it, he'll move on to the next phrase. If he doesn't like, then he'll repeat that again. And then you sit there for 2.5 hours, occasionally ask questions. Maybe he'll answer them, maybe he won't. Sometimes he'll answer the question 5 or 6 sessions later. And and then after 2 hours, 3 hours, he's okay, good. You pack up and then you go, and the next time you come, and there's no recording. It's just, I guess it's the old way of learning things, where I asked him once, like, how am I supposed to remember 3 hours worth of like things that we're just playing back and forth? And he's like, what's important will stick in there. And that's how you teach this, like, because it isn't you record a thing, then go home and then practice it and then learn it and internalize it. It's like in the lesson, whatever sticks, that means it is stuck very deep down in your conscience. It's an incredible way of learning. And I know it sometimes isn't for everyone, because what you need then is years and years on each rag to like really make it work. And adapting it back onto the piano is a huge game of trial and error. Like there's very specific things that you can do. Like sometimes you can just sit and say, oh, I'm going to try and get the mean of this rag, or I'm going to try and get gamak on this note. And then when you're doing all of those things, ultimately, like this is what Guruji would always say. It's like, first get the thing in your head, and it'll, like, it's not like you get it once and then it's there. It'll keep getting stronger and stronger, and the feeling of the rag and the feeling of that mean, then what that's supposed to like generate in you as a performer and in the listener, and then the actual face of the rag and the colors that you're supposed to bring out get stronger in your head. And once that's there and you have technical skills on the piano, it's often like the solutions to bring that out in the moment just present themselves to you, because your fingers know what to do in terms of dynamics or shaping in order to create the illusion of a mean. And then on the piano as an instrument, there's also sustain pedals which help like resonate the instrument. And what they do is they release a lot of the dampers on the strings. So like delicately balancing those also kind of create the effect of these things. I could do a little bit of in Behag. Like,
demonstrate also the mean and the gamak. How do you?
So I should also say this piano that I'm playing on, is a piano that I bought for $50 when I moved to New York, and
Okay.
it's an example of an instrument that was tried to put out to pasture many times over years. I think it's from the 1920s or 30s, and it was lying on its side. Someone was about to throw it away, and I just ended up paying a little bit of money and getting it over here. And it's far from a pristine instrument. There's a lot of things broken on
Okay.
it, and I'm sure you'll notice it isn't particularly in tune because it can't stay in tune for more than a day or two.
Okay.
But but so as
Yeah.
you would see over there, like it's very hard to, or it's impossible physically on this instrument to have a mean, but you can use a lot of the tools of the instrument to kind of create the illusion of it,
Okay.
and communicate the mean to the listener, which the human, the brain always fills in these gaps for us when
Okay.
we're listening to different when we're listening to like things that are happening. Then if the listener is aware of the rug and I'm aware of the rug, and the effect on the piano is that the notes are being differently played than usual when you're like striking them, like the idea ends up being communicated over to the listener.
Okay. So a lot of personal effort would go into that creation of those illusions, and I mean, a lot of imagination from your end also.
Yeah, I mean, I end up spending quite a lot of my day working on very small things. Like there was a period of 3 or 4 months where I was just playing one note on the piano and trying to figure out how I can get little bits of andolan on it. And there's like, I found like 6 different ways of doing that. Like one would be, so if you play, so what each note on the piano has 3 strings, and if you
Yeah.
like subtly play the note and those 3 strings are vibrating, and then you mute one of them, and then mute the other one, and then finally mute the third one, it creates little waves in the sound. But then another way of doing that would be the way that you press the key. And this is something that most pianists don't end up really thinking about. It's only the fact that I'm interested in Indian music that led to like experimenting with things like this. But like, so instead of the note decaying in a straight line, what ends up happening when you release and then quickly press it down again and then release and then quickly press it down, is you get little spirally waves of sound. And then the third and kind of the most ostentatious way of creating andolan or little waves in the sound was, which is not at all practical to do, is if you like shut the lid, play the note, and then open it and flap it up and down, which doesn't really work. It's not the most graceful solution to the problem.
Okay. Now we come to, we've talked about various things right from your introduction to piano to how you got into Indian music, your early training in Western classical and jazz also, and also how you approached, how you were taught later on. Now we come to composition, like composing tunes and all that. When did you figure that out, and like, what is your approach towards?
So, I mean, there's so many different types of composition. And the thing is, if you're an improviser, and I end up doing a lot of different improvisational musics, the line between like composing something and improvising something gets more and more grayed out. Because initially, when I would write music, a lot of it would be more jazz based, where I was just writing charts to play with like drums and bass and piano, and some of it would be inspired by Indian classical music. And then there was a period of time where I was trying to write very, very specific music for like I wrote a piece for string quartet and wrote some chamber music where I was like putting as much detail in as I could for each person. And these days with composition, what I end up doing most of the time is there's a piano trio in New York that I like. I love playing with a great bassist and drummer. And the idea is to take things that the DNA is based in Indian classical music.
Okay.
And not necessarily say the pool of notes or the rhythms or something like that, in the ideas of Indian classical music, which the special things about Indian music for me is that every single note has a personality. Like in a rag, there's notes that are shy, there's notes that are resting notes that you veer towards more, there's notes that have a magnetic pull on other notes, there's notes that don't like being next to other notes, so you can't do that. So like concepts like that, which really give sounds a very distinct personality in how you use to improvise them. Like that would be an idea of something that I like taking it out of Indian classical music and then bringing it into this kind of jazz-based piano trio and seeing how that works.
Okay. Could you play some of your pieces that you wrote, at least the basics? Like, we don't have a piano trio out here. We don't have the bassist and drummer, but some of the basic melodies and.
Yeah, let me think. I could play. I'll play one of the more jazz-based ones. I think that would work better without the other musicians over here.
Okay, fine. Well, what's it called? And you can also later on, once you play it, you can explain about how you went.
This one was called Goodbye Glasgow. I wrote it when I was leaving Scotland to after I finished my undergrad over there.
Okay. Wow, fantastic. What inspired you? I mean, apart from the fact that you were leaving Scotland and all, like, so how did you go about writing this piece?
For this tune, um, I this was actually a song that I'd written about like 4 or 5 pages of super detailed piano bass horn charts,
Hmm.
and everything was coming out of different rags segueing together, um, and pitch material from like various rags, and it was based on like this very nerdy idea of like, if I like say the first phrase is kamaj and then it ends on
Hmm.
like the pa of kamaj, but then the pa becomes the sa, and then I go to the next rag in a thing, and I finished writing this huge um, thing, and it sounded awful. It was like very contrived and didn't flow at all. And just felt very stiff. So I scrapped most of the pages and only kept 13 bars
Okay.
and made it more of a blues kind of a weird a weird form of blues. So,
Okay.
um, which seemed to work a lot better. And I guess that was like one of those learning experiences where
Sure.
simple ideas end up working better than overcomplicated uh,
Once.
things.
Okay. There have been some requests here, like somebody is requesting an evening raga, an evening melody, so, or a folk tune. So you can
Okay.
play a bit,
Um,
whatever.
yeah.
You can just
Uh,
announce what you're going to play, and
yeah. Let me think. Um, I could just stick. Yeah, I could stick with Behag and
yeah,
play Lut Ulji,
Ulji.
which is
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Latolji Sulajhaja Balam.
yeah. So
Fantastic. I was actually controlling myself because I know the words of the song and I almost sang along, but
Yeah.
luckily I didn't. It was really well done. Yeah.
Oh.
We've covered a lot, but tell us about the fluid piano. Like that's something that also you've worked on.
The flute piano is a prototype instrument created by a man named Jeff Smith in the
Okay.
UK. It's basically a completely acoustic piano that can bend notes. So
Okay.
obviously incredibly well suited to Indian
Indian
music and
style.
other forms of music that have a lot of bends and alternate tunings and things. I went to check it out in 2009 for the first time when it was just built, and then 5 years. It took 5 years to like get the resources and everything together to go over and record an album on it, um, which we managed to do in 2015 and came out, I think, a year later.
Okay.
But it's a piano with much lower string tension, so there's sliders where the strings usually are, that you can use to like change the pitch up and down. So every single note has a slider that you can shift, and it's it was basically like learning how to play a new instrument. I had
Okay.
3 days to sit with it, and then one day to record the album, which
Oh
was
wow.
really, really fun, really exciting. I think I spent over 12, 13 hours every day playing that instrument over those 3 days.
Was it easy? Was it like challenging? What was the?
It was, there was, the thing is, I was preparing for it, trying to remember what the instrument felt like to play 5 years before.
Mm.
Um, and there were a lot of things when I got there that were different. Some things that I thought it would be able to do that it couldn't, and then a lot of new things that the instrument, a lot of new ideas came out of experimenting with it. And we kind of changed the instrument up a little bit because it was a prototype, so there were
Yeah.
always little problems that come up, and then the sound, because there's lower string tension, the volume was a lot lower, so they didn't have any felt on the hammers that actually hit the strings, which made a really kind of old forte piano style harsh sound.
Okay.
But for Indian music, I really wanted a more mellow, warm thing, so we ended up getting a bunch of felt put on the hammers.
Okay.
And then there was a balancing act of what is the exact amount of felt that you should put on to like still have people be able to like hear the instrument, but the sound not to be too harsh. It was really fun. I love messing around with things like that.
Okay. Tell us about your collaborations. Anybody you want to collaborate with?
Um, I feel like I've been really, really lucky in having played with a lot of different really incredible musicians. And the thing with collaborations is it's always an insanely beneficial learning opportunity, because I don't like doing the thing where you like meet together for 20 minutes, find something that sort of works, and then go play the concert and then it's over. It's nicer to have like longer term things where you're like really sitting and sharing and really getting to like the juice of each person's musical style or ideas and things. And for me, like one of my favorite collaborations has definitely been with Martin Hayes and Dennis Cahill, who are Irish traditional musicians. But a lot of the ideas that they have with Irish music is kind of very similar to the way Indian classical music is approached, where taking time, stretch things out, like economy of like notes and tunes, but like really, it's more, I guess what could sum it up is like thinking so deep inside the box that you don't need to think outside of the
Outside
box.
of the
You
box.
like
Yeah.
go really, really deep into the thing that, so that's there's a lot more detail in the very small things.
Anybody you'd like to collaborate with? Somebody who's there on your, I have to play with this person types.
I mean, there's thousands. There's so many. Like Terry Riley would be one of
Oh wow, minimalism.
yeah, one of the huge people that I'd love to work with. Yeah, and then from, I mean, Indian classical music scene, there's thousands and thousands of musicians who are absolutely incredible. Like Bahauddin Dagarji would be a huge.
Okay.
I would love to play with Bina at some point.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you do a concert abroad, how much do you have to explain Indian music to them? Like, what is the audience like typically? Like, there will be some Indians in the audience, but there'll also be some foreigners who are new to Indian music, maybe.
Yeah. So it kind of depends. Like, I don't see that big a difference compared to India and abroad a lot of the times. Like, the only thing in India is people would recognize the lighter classical things, but
Yeah.
often the main rugs, there's a lot of people who haven't been introduced to it or don't really know how the music works. Abroad, they won't. Obviously, there's a lot of people who won't know the lighter songs or like recognize the Tumri or something that you when you
Yeah.
play. But it's kind of surprising how many people have at least a basic knowledge of Indian classical music.
Okay.
And it's definitely not this thing that it's a super exotic new thing to listen to. Like people are familiar with it. They like going to concerts and they know what they're getting into when they go to an Indian music concert. So it's been surprisingly nice and very very positively received. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Utsav, it's been wonderful speaking to you, and we'd of course like to listen to a little more of your music. So, some we covered most of your journey as a musician, also the way you think about music, and especially the adaptation that you had, and the various small challenges that you faced, and your recordings. It's anything you'd like to add apart from what we've already said?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, so there is somebody has asked for some folk or Sufi music if possible, or some light classical, if not, some maybe two pieces if you want to.
Okay.
We have time for one short one and one elaborate one.
Okay.
So, huh?
Um,
Chap Tilak you can do. There's somebody was asking for Chap Tilak.
I could do a short chop tilak, and then I
Sure,
might
sure.
finish with Tumri.
Okay, sure. That'll be fine. So great speaking again to you, and Nani will come back after you finish your things. I'll be around here, and
Okay, sure. Yeah, nice to talk to you.
yeah, yeah.
Utsav, this was so beautiful. So beautiful. And I've been hearing you play for years now, but today I learned so much about the piano from you, which was like so fascinating. Seriously, so many intricacies, so many details. How you've been playing the nuances of the Indian classical ragas on the piano. Not for nothing are you called the raga pianist, and probably one of the only raga pianists that we have. It was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for this, and thank you so much for being a part of Showcase Studio. Naren, what a beautiful interview, and you brought out
Thank you.
so much information, so many extra things that we hadn't even thought of, which came along. But of course, I have to say one thing, typically as greedy as I always get with all my artists. But before I ask you and I make my request to you, Utsav, I just have one question. So you've been exploring Indian classical ragas on the piano and you've been playing for so many years. First of all, what were the kind of difficulties that just a quick thing I want to just know, what are the kind of difficulties that you faced when you started playing? Because when you're playing the rags, for example, in Indian classical, there is so much of mean and there's so much of gamak and there's so much of harkat, जैसे बोलते हैं हम लोग, because कुछ बातें हिंदुस्तानी क्लासिकल की हिंदी में ही करनी पड़ती हैं. So, when you have all those nuances coming up, so how do you, can you just do a quick, like little quick demo on, like, when you're showing a mean or you're showing a gamak? I know Naren asked in between, and that time you played a piece. So just like how difficult was that for you to bring it? Because this is genuinely a true confluence of East and West, because you have a Western instrument playing Indian classical music. So you've actually accomplished that, which is huge.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, you just like and then there's a lot of the other variations is just like soft little grace notes, and
Yeah,
like say like something like gamma could be like
that's beautiful.
um,
Oh, that was lovely. We have a beautiful comment from, of course, lots of really nice comments, and everybody's loved your music and loved all the learning that's come. So, Sunita Bhuyan, another amazing violinist and a very dear friend, has just commented this. And God bless Utsav. Wow, what an amazing and matured artist he has bloomed into since we played together in Glasgow in 2014. Wish him many more heights.
oh, that's really
And
sweet.
yeah, and of course, I have to make a special mention of my very dear friend and your mom, Sangeeta, who I've known her for the longest time. And I think when we got you over for our Goa Rhythm and Blues Festival, since then, I think we became friends, which I really cherish even today. So, Utsav, just to end this evening, uh, just that you play any one of your, I mean, I'm going to be a very typical cheesy one. Any one of your typical favorite Bollywood songs,
Okay. Um.
whatever's your favorite.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we can close with that. No problem at all.
Wow.
Thank you, Utsav.
Wow.
Thank you so, so, so much. This is really one of my favorite songs, and I
Yeah.
promise everybody I did not discuss this with Utsav at all.
Yeah.
Right, Utsav?
Yeah, even I
Can
love
you?
it.
Yeah, the
I
thing
Fancy.
love.
I was actually listening to this yesterday and thinking about it, and that's probably the first time that I played that in 10, 12 years. But it's been on my mind because it's such a beautiful arrangement. And
It is. And the composition, the melody. I have a beautiful comment again from Usha Rajaram, who says, "Thanks, Utsav. It was a wonderful musical Dashera evening. Enjoyed Bihag, one of my favorites." So thank you for being with us, Usha ji. You've been with us in the last few shows. And then another really nice one from Parag saying, "Fabulous Utsav. Will always have a soft spot for piano as it's an instrument that I learned before giving it up for school academics." So you have a word, you have a message for Parag on that one. Utsav, would you like to say something to him?
I guess it's never too late to go back. And
That's true. That's true, right, guys? It's like 7:40 already. I think we are like way, way, way over time. So we will call it. We'll close it here. But of course, I mean, this is an evening that we'd love it to continue forever. So thank you so much,
Thank you so
Utsav.
much.
thanks for
And
having.
thank you, Naren, once again for doing this so beautifully.
Thanks so much.
And
Yeah. Bye.
I hope I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed putting it together. And next Sunday we will see you again back on Showcase Studio. The artists we are going to announce only on Wednesday, so that is a surprise till Wednesday. Look forward to seeing you back here. Thank you so much. Happy Dussehra, everyone. Good night.
Bye. Happy Dashera, everybody.